Good evening. You're watching the news at 7:30 on ATV. I'm Edna Zhe.
And I'm Emily Su. Here's a look at tonight's top stories.
3 leaders of Occupy Central urge students to retreat as they promise to surrender to police tomorrow.
Student leaders refuse to retreat, insisting they want to force government into talks first.
Siwa Leung expresses concern about security at Tamar and warns students to watch out for radicals from Mong Kok. The 3 original leaders of the Occupy Central movement will turn themselves in to police tomorrow, and they're urging student protesters to follow their example and retreat.
But they're refusing to call it the end of the civil disobedience campaign for democracy, insisting that the fight for universal suffrage will continue.
The 3 who started the Occupy Central campaign 20 months ago were grim-faced as they made their big announcement this afternoon. Academics Benny Tai and Chan Kin Mang, along with Reverend Chi Yu Ming, will voluntarily hand themselves over to police tomorrow afternoon.
To surrender and bear the legal consequences is to respect the rule of law. Surrender is not an act of cowardice. It isn't the courage to act on a promise. To surrender is not to fail. It's a silent denunciation of a heartless government.
When Tai read out the trio's open letter explaining their decision to the people of Hong Kong, Chu became emotional. I've cried many times before when I saw police officers beat up unarmed pro-democracy demonstrators with batons, said the Baptist church minister. As a 70-year-old man, I feel sad that after more than 60 days, the government still refuses to give protesters a positive response to their demands for genuine universal suffrage. They urge protesting students to retreat and recuperate to fight another day, addressing leaders of the Federation of Students and Scholarism, the 2 student groups that are now heading what's left of the civil disobedience movement.
We urge the students to retreat, to put down deep roots in the community and transform the movement to extend the spirit of the umbrella movement.
Tai, who's a law professor at Hong Kong University, denied abandoning young protesters still out in the streets and brushed aside criticism that their decision to surrender was too little, too late. But he admitted that the clashes over the weekend between police and protesters trying to surround government headquarters at Tamar had rushed them into pulling out.
Some of the frontline police officers, they seem to be out of control. And I just don't know how much more violence they will inflict on the occupiers in the possible future action of clearance.
Tai admitted the recent violence in Mong Kok and Admiralty has shown that the pro-democracy campaign has deviated from its original principle of peace and love. But he insisted that most of the protesters were still peaceful, and the few who resorted to violence had been left with no choice by a government that continues to ignore them. Chu revealed that the trio had actually wanted to turn themselves in as early as the 5th of October, assuming that they had already accomplished their mission to wake up Hong Kong people. The trio refused to describe their surrender as the end of the civil disobedience campaign. Instead, they explained that the original plan to occupy Central had quickly been replaced by the so-called umbrella movement, after students jumped the gun by storming the main square in the government complex at the end of September. That made it meaningless to ask whether the campaign was over or not, they insisted. The Occupy Central leaders said it was up to individual demonstrators to accept or reject the retreat call, as they were all volunteers acting of their own free will. It's not clear what's next for them after they surrender to police tomorrow.
We may be detained, or we may be just asked to leave. We just do not know. I think it's better to be answered by the police on what will happen to us.
The trio will admit to participating in an unauthorized public assembly, but are expecting police to lay more severe charges against them. Cardinal Joseph Sen, the outspoken leader of Hong Kong's Catholic Church, will surrender alongside the trio tomorrow to take responsibility for his own participation in the pro-democracy campaign.
The Pan-Democrats say they have no intention of surrendering to the police, although they've been distancing themselves from the recent violence involving protesters.
Student leaders are refusing to retreat, preferring to see how their hunger strike plays out first. 12 hours into his hunger strike along with 2 other student activists, scholarism leader Joshua Wong appeared to be going strong. They're trying to inject some much-needed momentum into their pro-democracy campaign and force the government to return to the negotiating table.
We ask for another round of negotiation with the government as well as the restart of the political reform progress. That's what we want.
Responding to the Occupy Central leaders' decision to turn themselves in, the student activists said they were not giving up yet.
At this moment, scholarism will not surrender tomorrow. And moreover, actually, we think that surrender is not the only way out for our civil disobedience.
Wang put the ball in the government's court.
If the government would try to get a meeting with the students to discuss on whether they will relaunch the political consultation immediately, actually they can solve the argument between the society.
Civic Party leader Alan Leung said he respected the Occupy Central trio's decision to surrender, but insisted the Pan-Democrats would not follow. He said most of them intend to continue until the way forward becomes clearer. Others played down the impact tomorrow's surrender would have on their movement.
What is certain is that they were looking at a later date, but they decided to announce it today and take action tomorrow. I think this is a signal of an urgent call to stop any further violence and ask the police not to employ or deploy any level of violence in their further actions.
I think the Occupy Trio have done a lot for Hong Kong. They have made huge contribution to the pro-democracy movement. They have sacrificed a lot for more than a year.
Lau was among 23 Pan-Democrat lawmakers who issued a joint statement last night, urging the students not to further escalate their movement. That drew a sharp response from the radical colleague Albert Chan of People Power.
The Pan-Democrat's decision to urge the student to withdraw is totally unwarranted and also it's not a proper one. Mainly this is a students-led political movement, and it should be continued to be led by the students.
Security Secretary Lai Tong-kwok applauded the Occupy founders' decision.
Any person who intend to hand themselves in because they believed that they have breached the law, of course, is welcome. The police have an established practice and procedures to handle these kind of situations, and they will act accordingly.
But he remained tight-lipped as to whether police would clear the road blockades in Admiralty anytime soon. Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying has warned student protesters in Admiralty to watch out for radical troublemakers from the Mong Kok sit-in.
Leung described them as people who are easy to invite but hard to send away and expressed concern about the security situation at Tamar.
Speaking before his weekly cabinet meeting this morning, Leung Chun-ying issued another strong warning to pro-democracy protesters who have been camping out in Admiralty for more than 9 weeks now. The chief executive first condemned student leaders behind the mass sit-in for rallying supporters to besiege the government's headquarters and clash with police at Tamar on Sunday night. He went on to claim that most of the troublemakers who had violently charged police lines in Admiralty came from the protest camp in Mong Kok after it was cleared under court orders last week. Leung described them as radicals who are easy to invite but hard to send away. Everybody knows the Occupy protesters in Mong Kok come from more complicated backgrounds and are different from those in Admiralty, said Leung. Now that the Federation of Students and Scholarism have invited Mong Kok protesters to come to Admiralty, it makes me very worried about the overall security of the area. Leung urged student protesters at Tamar to be extra careful with the Mong Kok crowd, noting confrontations among the demonstrators themselves. The chief executive also referred to the incident last month when a handful of radicals broke glass panels and tried to storm the Lechko complex. The attack was blamed on activist group Civic Passion, which originally had some of its members camping out in Mong Kok for the long haul. Leung expressed fears that history will repeat itself now that those protesters are digging in right next to the government complex. The chief executive also urged scholarism leader Joshua Wong and 2 other student activists to give up their hunger strike in Admiralty. He advised them to look after their own health as the first cold spell of this winter begins. Political reform for the 2017 chief executive election must not rely on resistance, Leung insisted. I've said it in the past, any form of resistance will only be futile. It's not that we don't sympathize with these young students and protesters' aspirations. It's just that the only genuine universal suffrage is one that complies with the basic law and decisions made by the National People's Congress Standing Committee.
The High Court has rejected an appeal by pro-democracy activists to overturn a ban from entering a large part of Mongkok.
The judge ruled there is a risk they will reoffend and they have no business being in the busy retail hub. ATV's Winner Wang reports.
There was no hiding their disappointment as the activists walked out of the High Court this morning. Lester Shum from the Federation of Students, People Power activist Tam Tak Chi, audio engineer Felix Chung, and salesman Lo Yin Kwan, who did not show up, were challenging a court order banning them from entering most of Mongkok. The 4 were among those arrested last week during court-backed clearances of barricades and tents set up by pro-democracy protesters to block traffic in the busy shopping hub. While the operation began with authorized removal workers dismantling the barricades, bailiffs asked for help from police officers who eventually took over the clearance and clashed with protesters who accused them of using excessive force. In an attempt to overturn their bail conditions, the 4 argued that their freedom of movement and liberty had been undermined. But Judge Derek Pang disagreed, ruling today that the impact of the ban was minimal as there was no urgent and real need for them to be in the designated no-go zones. Citing the ongoing tensions and exceptional situation, Pang also rejected claims by the defendants' lawyers that there's no real risk they will reoffend since the clearance is over. In particular, the judge singled out Lester Shum as leading the movement. Shum said he had no choice but to obey the court's decision.
We will discuss the what's next up, including whether we will continue our occupation movement or we will retreat with different friends like religious in MOT and different parties.
But he admitted there's little the students can do to counter the force used against them by police. For his part, Tam Tak Chi crumpled a copy of the judgment to express his anger. He complained that the ban infringes on his freedom of religion since he's unable to attend church now. But the veteran activists refused to quit and warned of taking their protests to Chim Sha Tsui and Yau Ma Tei. Winner Wang, ATV News.
3 lawmakers have been given warning letters about visitor rules after they were accused of letting protest leaders use the LegCo building as a base to break the law.
The LegCo president is imposing new rules on allowing visitors to use facilities meant for lawmakers. ATV's Arthur Akiola reports.
Speaking after a LegCo commission meeting today, Zhang Yuk-sing announced that warning letters would be issued to 3 pan-democratic lawmakers, Leung Kwa-keung, Lee Chuk-yan, and Wu Chi-wai. The LegCo president accused them of breaking the rules by inviting visitors to use facilities meant only for lawmakers.
We should not allow an individual member to use the same meeting room for a long period of time for purposes other than business connected with business of the LegCo. The Commission also decided that after midnight and before 6 a.m. on the next morning, visitors should not stay in the complex without being accompanied by a member, at least a member.
Pro-establishment lawmakers have accused their pan-democratic colleagues of letting student leaders use the building as a base for the Occupy protests. They've complained about student leaders using LegCo facilities on Sunday night when they rallied their supporters to lay siege to the Tamar complex. Arthur Akiola, ATV News.
Still to come on ATV's main news tonight. Immigration busts fake wedding syndicate for mainlanders wanting Hong Kong ID cards.
North Korea refuses to deny cyber attack on Sony as revenge for Hollywood film mocking Kim Jong-un.
All about Asia. With geographical advantages, Wuhan aspires to be the industrial and urban center of China.
做内需的市场的最中心的地带，桥梁的地带。
Brimming with potential for tourism growth, Da Nang of Vietnam is on the way to a remarkable success.
We have to create or differentiate our tourism product, improve what we have now.
Boomtown Asia, Thursday night at 10:05. Current events, controversial issues, in-depth accounts of the latest news and happenings that impact us all. Get to the heart of the matter. Get the inside story, Friday night at 8. Few people really understand its unsinkable soul.
Wouldn't you like to know what is ahead in your world?
Today I will show you what God says about how you can achieve real success.
It's far more than a book. It's God's revelation to mankind. Tomorrow's World, Saturday morning at 9. Get a deeper insight into the key issues of our time. Share unique points of view. The forum. The news. The discussion. All the hottest topics are only on Check In Current News. Newsline, Sunday night at 7.
Tai Chi is a healthy exercise. Yet doing Tai Chi in public administration is not healthy at all. In local slang, it means shirking responsibility or not giving people the help they need. In other words, maladministration. Let's say no to that. To complain against government departments and public organizations, please call the Office of the Ombudsman.
Stay close to fresh K-pop from the hottest selling artists to the up-and-coming superstars. Keep in touch with the latest chart of the Korean pop music scene on the Samsung Digital Special, Pops in Seoul, Thursday at 6:25.
The Immigration Department has arrested 59 people after busting a fake marriage ring.
The syndicate is believed to have arranged unions between 80 mainland and Hong Kong couples since 2012. According to the Immigration Department, the mastermind behind the bogus marriage agency is a 58-year-old woman. Although she is technically divorced from her husband, the pair still live together and both are allegedly involved in fake marriages with people on the mainland. Not only that, but so are the couple's 2 children and a relative, who helps run their illegal business. The fake marriage syndicate began operating in 2012 and has since paired up 80 mainlanders looking to secure Hong Kong identity cards by marrying locals. The fraudsters would charge up to $100,000 to find a match, and Hong Kongers willing to take part would get as much as $40,000. Most of the Hong Kongers involved were in their 20s or early 30s. They were apparently told that getting married on the mainland would not stop them from marrying in Hong Kong later, which is not the case.
In fact, before the registration of marriage in Hong Kong, the couple has to make an oath declaring that they are free to marry. And then once they are discovered making a false declaration, or they have been discovered that they have solemnized a marriage before, they will commit the offense of bigamy.
So far, 59 people have been arrested for conspiracy to defraud and false representation to immigration officers since the operation began in July. Police are investigating a suspicious fire that injured 2 people in a public housing flat in Sham Shui Po this morning.
Firefighters found that a gas pipe connected to the kitchen stove had been deliberately removed. Winna Wong reports.
Firefighters rushed to the scene at Fu Cheng Estate in Sham Shui Po after receiving a call at around 10 this morning. The fire broke out inside a flat on the 9th floor of Fu Yi House. Residents had to be evacuated from the building. At first, I heard a loud bang and thought it had come from the construction site nearby, said this resident who lives on the 18th floor. It wasn't until I saw smoke and smelled a burning odor that I realized there was a fire. As firefighters made their way up, they found a woman with burn injuries to her head lying in the stairwell. A security guard was with her. He had tried to put out the fire with an extinguisher but failed. Inside the flat, firefighters also found a man, believed to be the woman's husband, lying in the kitchen. The flames were put out in 15 minutes. According to Senior Station Officer Lee Yu-lun from the Mongkok branch, it looked like the fire had been deliberately started. A gas pipe connected to the kitchen stove had been intentionally removed, and a spanner was found next to it. Contrary to early reports, Lee also said there had been no explosion inside the flat. The loud bangs heard by neighbors were likely to have come from compressed gas canisters, such as hairsprays or insecticides. The couple and security guard were taken to Princess Margaret Hospital in Caritas Medical Center. Wenna Wong, ATV News.
North Korea has said wait and see in response to allegations that it was involved in a cyber attack on Sony Pictures and the leak of 5 of its latest films.
The attack comes less than a month before the studio is set to release a film about a plot to kill the country's leader, Kim Jong-un. Arthur Akaola reports.
The FBI has issued a warning that hackers are using malicious software to launch destructive cyber attacks on U.S. businesses. Although Sony Pictures was not named, the warning comes after a major hack attack against the studio last week, followed by the release online of 5 of its latest films. One of the films, Fury, which hasn't been released in cinemas yet in Hong Kong, has already been downloaded more than 1 million times from file-sharing websites. The attack has been linked to the studio's upcoming release of The Interview, a comedy about 2 journalists hired by the CIA to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But Pyongyang wasn't laughing when its foreign ministry wrote to the United Nations in June, saying the making and release of the movie would be an act of war. It threatened a merciless countermeasure if the US allowed the film to be shown or defended the making of it. Sony is said to be investigating reports that the attack was carried out by hackers, possibly from China, acting on behalf of North Korea in retaliation for the film. While it all sounds like the plot of another Hollywood blockbuster, Pyongyang hasn't denied being behind the attack. Its spokesman at the UN said people should just wait and see when asked if North Korea was involved. Before computer screens went dark at Sony Pictures, they displayed a red skull and the phrase hacked by GOP, which reportedly stands for Guardians of Peace. They also threatened to leak stolen company secrets such as the salaries of Sony Picture employees, including top executives. The FBI says the attack also wiped data from hard drives and shut down the corporate email system for a week. Arthur Akiola, ATV News.
U.S. President Barack Obama has announced a plan for thousands of officers to have cameras attached to their bodies as part of efforts to restore faith in the police.
He's also vowed to end controversial measures to equip local police forces with military gear. ATV's Ben O'Rourke reports.
Protesters across the U.S. are still demanding justice after a white policeman was let off the hook for shooting dead unarmed black teen Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. They say it was a case of racial profiling.
We don't want this to be a moment but a movement. We don't want this to be a one-time thing. We want people to keep their eyes open. We want people to be aware that black people are being killed every 28 hours by white cops.
The U.S. government appears to be listening.
The Justice Department's investigation into the shooting death of Michael Brown, as well as our investigation into allegations of unconstitutional policing patterns or practices by the Ferguson Police Department, remain ongoing and remain active.
Holder promised to end racial profiling once and for all, with a set of new guidelines for law enforcers. But not everyone in the audience was convinced they would make any difference.
There will be a tendency on the part of some to condemn what we just saw, but we should not. What we saw there was a genuine expression of concern and involvement.
But at a meeting with black youth groups and activists, US President Barack Obama threw his weight behind Holder's new measures and promised a review of a controversial program to provide police with military equipment.
I will be signing an executive order that specifies how we are going to make sure that that program is accountable, how we're going to make sure that that program is transparent, and how are we going to make sure that we're not building a militarized culture inside our local law enforcement.
At the same time, he's asking lawmakers for money to attach cameras to the uniforms of 50,000 police officers, so there will be no doubt about the circumstances in future shootings. It's also good news for the main manufacturer of body cameras, Taser, which also makes the controversial electric stun guns that have killed hundreds of people. Ben O'Rourke, ATV News.
Time now for sports with Raymond Yang.
So the sports world is getting ready for new doping rules, Raymond.
Well, that's right, but first in our roundup of sports stories. Australian cricketers and officials are gathering in the small town of Maxfield for tomorrow's funeral for late player Philip Hughes. Some of the biggest names in Australian sport are gathering in the small town of Maxfield, New South Wales, to pay their last respects to cricketer Philip Hughes, who died last week after being hit on the head by a fastball. He would have been 26 at the weekend. His death triggered a huge outpouring of grief and global concern about cricket safety. Around 5,000 people are expected for his funeral, which begins at noon Hong Kong time tomorrow. I have the right to participate. Britain's anti-doping agency has marked 5 years as it prepares for a new world anti-doping code, which comes into force in the new year. But there are concerns within the organization that the new rules will not be implemented equally by all countries.
There is a greater focus on the athlete support person problem and away from the end user. And so the code now creates a new platform for investigatory work into athlete support personnel to make sure that bad